please welcome Frankie with an IE, Frankie Solarik, to the stage. All right.
Check, 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 check. Thank you very much. Woo! All right, how we doing? Yeah! All right. First off, as you can see, I'm I'm pretty animated, so I want to make sure that you guys follow me. I'm going to be walking back and forth, swinging my arms around. You guys in the front here are in the splash zone. I call it the splash zone, so you might get splashed with water, etc. All right. First up, thank you so much to everyone here for joining me, spending your time with me today. There's a lot of stuff going on, so I appreciate you joining me. So, if I can just ask you a couple questions here. First off, show of hands, how many people here have heard of BarChef before? Oh, sick. Whoa. Okay. I guess that's basically why you're here, I guess, hopefully. Okay. And secondly, how many people are bartenders? Sick. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Shout out to you guys as well. We're all in the same field here. So I want to make sure that during this presentation, you guys are throwing questions at me, okay? Because it's all dependent on who's in the crowd based on the technical level of the depth that we go into here. So as you'll see, I've purposely chosen to bring the lights down quite a bit because with my whole approach to the craft, there's a huge multi-sensory element to my perspective on the genre, okay? So first off, huge shout out to modernism. Is anyone here that's joining me today, would you consider yourself a classically focused bartender that you strictly focus on classic cocktails? Yeah! Okay, awesome. That makes me very, 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 very excited because I have a book called The BarChef, A Modern Approach to Cocktails. And it's the idea and an ideology and a perspective of challenging the convention of what's possible within the genre, okay? I'm not ripping on classic cocktails by any means. Classic cocktails are classics for a reason. They're not going anywhere. As far as the fundamental of understanding of how balance and structure of flavor profiles works, it's a great way to begin the perspective, right? But that being said, as we're all bartenders here, okay, coming now as well from a culinary background, seeing that for the last, 8 years I've worked in the kitchen, it's very important to express yourselves artistically through your own voice, okay? We're not here, it would be like similar to a chef being completely obsessed with Auguste Escoffier and only replicating his recipes. The idea is, the reason we're all in this industry is to give ourselves a voice creatively, right? We want to put our own individual mark on this expression. Is that right? Is that fair to say? Yeah? Why do you guys make cocktails? We make cocktails to give our guests an experience, right? We're not making cocktails to just replicate recipes from the 40s. I'm a corpse survivor number, whatever, 765. That's great, that's amazing, but let's create our own voice. Yeah? Okay, amazing. So my BarChef, okay, we opened 10 years ago. We've been listed as one of the top 6 new and innovative bars in the world by Food and Wine magazine, top 6 bars in the world by Condé Nast Traveler. We've been featured in the New York Times, CNN, Forbes magazine, National Geographic, blah, 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 blah. And the reason is because of our approach to the craft, okay? It's the ideology of challenging the preconceived notions of what's possible within the genre, okay? Make sense? Let's begin. Slides. Here we go. All right. So, BarChef, a culinary approach to the field, okay? What does that mean? Why do we do it? So with my bar, we opened 10 years ago. The idea was to create a program where we made as many of the ingredients and the mise en place for the program in-house, okay? Reason being is that allowed me to have creative control of every single element of the composition, okay? So we're talking about the classic definition of a cocktail being a spirit base, okay? So for my program, I'm thinking spirits being the canvas, if you will, of the composition, okay? The canvas of the composition, your spirit base, is what defines your beginning of your expression, okay? So if it's gonna be mezcal, there's gonna be slight undertones of vegetal smoke, right? If it's gonna be gin, there's gonna be huge botanic elements, juniper, etc., lavender, quite floral and bright, right? If it's gonna be something like Islay Scotch, for example, it's gonna be a little bit darker, obviously undertones of smoke again, right? So this is the fundamental beginning of your composition. This is your canvas, okay? So with our approach at the bar, we take that ideology of the canvas being the color, the spirit base, if you will, and we try to say, okay, well, what can we do to add on to that experience? So we start to incorporate infusions, right? We're talking 10 years ago. Back in the day, when I started playing around with infusions and incorporating that ideology, it wasn't being done anywhere. There was no reference. There was no recipes. I couldn't refer to www.google. I still say www, but google.com and enter infusing spirits with stuff. There was none of that. I had to completely teach myself how to do this properly in the sense of the way that different spirit bases absorb the essential oils from different ingredients, okay? So it's been a very self-taught, very intimate experience for me artistically, and I'm very excited to be here today to share this knowledge with you, okay? It's also very important to me, little sidetrack, very important to me that you guys ask questions, okay? Seeing that you're basically almost all bartenders, which is amazing, please don't hesitate to reach out and just ask a question if something pops into your head, okay? I have no issue with that. It's totally cool. I'm not up here. My slides aren't memorized in a specific order as timing and all that stuff. I just come up here and I just talk to you guys, okay, and share my vision and my passion. I'm an extremely passionate guy. I love what I do. I feel very grateful to do what I do. As an artist, from an artist perspective, think about how many musicians are out there, or painters or sculptors, that would kill to be given the opportunity to express themselves artistically and make a living, right? So we're all very fortunate to have that opportunity. So spirit bases, BarChef. So we started with infusions, right? And then we kind of looked, okay, so if that's going to be our composition base, our canvas, if you will, of our composition, what's another element of complexity that we can add to our cocktails that incorporates that ideology, that perspective, right? Which would be bitters, right? 2008, started making bitters myself. It was an infusion process based on spirit bases being either rye or gin, started focusing on those as the beginning, and then different elements of complexity and subtle nuances based on the proportion of the ingredients that I'm adding, okay? So I have this thing where it's like different ingredients, so for example, bright spice, if you will, would be like green cardamom, fennel seed, okay? Those are considered our bright floral qualities, okay? Then, to add complexity and depth, right? You would add different elements of, for example, there's star anise, cinnamon, you have licorice root, what else? Vanilla bean, there's saffron, there's all these different elements of composition that you can take to add an overall complex balance, if you will, of your infusions. Does it make sense? Cool? How many people here are infusing at their own bar? Amazing. That's so sick. That makes me honestly, genuinely very happy because, like I said, back in the day, it wasn't happening. So to see this happening now more and more and more in the industry is so unbelievable, awesome. I feel very grateful to witness this transition into this perspective. Okay, so next up, we have a cocktail. We have a spirit base. We have bitters. What else do we need? We need sweetness, right, to balance. Okay, so there's two ways to achieve sweetness. Sugar, obviously, right? Yeah, accent liqueurs. So like maraschino, for example, bitter almond, or don't like to use the term, but amaretto, if you will. Bitter almond, okay, or marzipan, is an amazing flavor pairing with Islay Scotch, okay? Don't frown upon using accent liqueurs. Maraschino, for example, Luxardo maraschino in particular, is an amazing canvas that does an amazing job of absorbing essential oils from ingredients. So at my bar, I have green cardamom infused maraschino liqueur. We have lavender infused maraschino liqueur. There's caraway infused maraschino liqueur. And it's unbelievable because obviously we all know the viscosity and the alcohol content of maraschino. It's quite low in alcohol and super, super, super viscous, right? Which obviously would affect the infusion process, okay? In this case, maraschino liqueur absorbs literally of these elements what they smell like. Maraschino just extracts that power, and you can it literally tastes exactly as it smells. So when I'm talking infusions of maraschino liqueur, I'm saying literally half a cup of green cardamom pods, okay, thrown in 60 ounces of maraschino liqueur and infused for 1 month and strained. And it is one of the most beautiful accent liqueurs, and you'll see it used in some of the slides that we're talking about today. It's beautiful, it's bright, it's fragrant, it's extremely floral, and it literally tastes of the same way that green cardamom smells, which is very, very cool. Okay, so let's start our slides. Woo! Yeah, okay. So the back bar, woo! All right, essentially, as a mixologist, these are our colors, if you will, in composition. So we have different elements here. We have spirits like mezcal, obviously, Isla scotches. As you can see, we put quite a big influence on our accent liqueurs, which you'll find there at the front row. Reason being is that we use a lot of them. It's a great way to achieve complexity and balance. We use, for example, amaretto, the pairing with Isla Scotch, you can pair that with saffron, toasted chamomile is another tone as well, star anise, cinnamon, etc. It goes beautifully with so many different elements of actual composition. So now, let's talk about obsession. I love this particular picture. It's my son actually took this picture, which is hilarious. So this particular slide, the reason it's here today is because I want to exude an energy of passion, okay? It's very, very, very important that you guys love what you do. If you don't love what you do something else, okay? Get out of the industry and do something else. Because as a guest, from a guest perspective, if you're very passionate and you absolutely love what you do, from a guest perspective, they can taste that love. They can absolutely 100% taste that love. If you don't care, and we all know it, if you don't care and you're just like, holy fuck, you're an actor and you're like, oh my God, I've got this crazy audition, I'm gonna make this drink, blah, 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 there you go, boom. The guest gets that vibe off you and is pissed off and doesn't wanna be there. He's not gonna enjoy that experience, right? So it's very, very important that you're very passionate about your expression. I have this quote. Can we go back to the slide for a second? I have this quote. It says, in order to create compositions with harmonious depth and complexity, you must build an emotional attachment to your ingredients, okay? And what that means, as you can see here, you got cacao and chamomile, star anise. I'm not saying to go that far, but I'm just saying that as an artist, you need to develop a relationship with your particular medium, okay? So what I mean is that if you're walking down the street and you see chamomile or lavender or rosemary growing in a garden, take a moment, go and rub the leaves, and smell your fingers. Interact with those ingredients. It's the only way that you're gonna be able to achieve paramount levels of complexity, because you develop a relationship that becomes visceral, it becomes internal, it becomes a part of you. And that is very, very special. In order to create these compositions with nuances of crazy amounts of complexity, you need to understand where they fit amongst the actual composition, if you will, okay? So when I say that, I mean like cinnamon, right? Cinnamon has like beautiful undertones of depth, but at the same time, as we all know, it's quite bright and sharp, okay? It's like almost like slightly astringent on the actual aromatic. So the way you interact with these ingredients, the way you develop these relationships is to spend time with them. Go home and make a cinnamon simple syrup, right? The idea is that simple syrup, equal parts sugar and water, right? We all know that, okay? If you double your water content and you put cinnamon in your simple syrup recipe and you simmer it for 15 minutes, you're then going to be able to achieve that same Brix, okay, that same sugar content, because you've been simmering for 15 minutes, right? So your water content is reducing. You're going back to that equal ratio of sugar and water, but then you have a beautifully flavored cinnamon simple syrup. This is all stuff, when I started doing this, 2007, again, no recipes, had to start messing around with it. And I took the ideology and the perspective. When I make tea, when I make chamomile tea, right, you have to let it simmer. You have to let it steep. How else are you going to extract those oils, right? So the same thing happens with simple syrup. If you do equal parts sugar and water, you throw cinnamon in there, you steep or you simmer that, next thing you know, it's going to be a gomme syrup. It's going to be overly sweet. You can't work with it, right? So that's why we double the water content. Okay, so develop those relationships. It's absolutely imperative, very, very, very imperative for your composition. Cool. So this next slide, I want you to look at it and I want you to put up your hand if you've seen or you've been to a bar recently, wherever you're from around the world, and you've experienced a cocktail or you've had a cocktail presented this way to you as a guest. You ready? Here we go. Can you put up your hand? Yeah? Okay, a few people. That's not bad. That's not bad. All right, so now it begins, the evolution of the program. I'm here today to talk about the evolution of the BarChef program. So this cocktail is our signature drink, okay? Came up with this recipe, started playing around with it in 2007, 2008, And the idea was simple. I was watching a episode of Iron Chef America, okay? And one of the chefs presented a dish to the judges. As he walked over, it was a ceramic bowl, upside down, right? And this is how we're here today to talk about like creativity and inspiration and all that stuff, okay? So he's walking over to the judges. He has an upside down ceramic bowl over his plate that he's presenting. And he walks up and he goes like this, and he presents it to the judge, puts it down, and he just lifts it up like this. And then as he lifted it up, there was this tiny little element of smoke that I saw released. And right there and then, I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna smoke a fucking cocktail. It was the coolest thing ever. I literally became absolutely obsessed with the technique. It was like, okay, so come up with a flavor profile, spirit base, viscosity, et cetera, that can withstand the element of smoke. How am I gonna smoke this drink? What am I gonna use? Originally, it was vanilla bean, right? So I just started playing around with vanilla bean. I had a glass vase that I took the flowers out and poured out the water and dried it and cleaned it, and then basically got this cocktail that I'd made, put it underneath the, and then we're talking like, they have these things now, smoking guns. Amazing. I didn't have that back in the day. It's crazy. This is like game changer. So I would get the vanilla bean and I would light it, and then I would put the cloche upside down over the cocktail, and then it would produce an amazing amount of smoke, actually. Smoked vanilla is absolutely insane, otherworldly. Like, it's amazing. We have a component at the bar called vanilla bean charcoal. And we take vanilla beans, we turn them into charcoal, and then we steep them in cream. And it has this beautiful undertone of like oak and wood and barn. It's absolutely amazing, soil, etc. So I started smoking this cocktail, and I was like, okay, there's not enough heat. I'm not getting enough smoke. So we started incorporating hickory. Hickory, when smoked, has quite a bitter tannic astringency to the actual smoke itself. So the vanilla bean was there to balance that flavor profile. So it ended up working really, really well. And for me, this particular cocktail, can we go back to that? Yeah, there it is, was the beginning of an ideology. It was the beginning of the modernist cocktail. I was like, from this point on, I became absolutely obsessed with challenging the genre and creating my own voice in this amazing industry, okay? So that's 2008. It's a $50 cocktail, $50. It's literally, I think, our second best-selling drink at the bar. So currently, right now, at the bar, we have 3-hour waits on Friday, Saturday nights. The bar team at the front of house is executing roughly 200 to 300 cocktails. Every single bitter, syrup, infusion is made in-house. So you can imagine the amount of volume of liquid that we're going through, and at the same time maintaining a program like that is incredibly involved. So I feel very fortunate to have the team that I have to be able to maintain the numbers to make sure that we have our bitters, for example, infusing for a minimum of 3 months. So we need to make sure we're always on top of that. So that just adds as well to that ideology of professionalism and being very passionate about your bar and your program, etc. Okay? So, next up, we have the beginning of the extension of the vehicle. So this is still quite early. This is 2010. I'm still behind the bar, okay? I'm still plating cocktails. We started to receive a lot of press. We started to receive a lot of international press, and we were getting busy. And I was behind the bar, and I was getting in the weeds. It was getting pretty busy. Here I am, dropping caviar, reverse purification for alginates, etc., making airs, emulsification. The technical level of my expression was getting to a point where I was having a hard time keeping up with the volume because we were 4 deep. I didn't have a doorman at that point. So I was like, okay, all right, let's do this. And I took it on. I was like, all right, like hand chipping ice spheres to order for the smoked Manhattan. I had blow torches there going. I was like dropping alginates. It was insane. I remember Chef Grant Achatz, who is like the OG. We give a shout out to Chef Grant. He was sitting at the bar. It was like a Friday or Saturday night. And I'm like, chipping up ice spheres. I had 4 smoked Manhattans up at the time, so I was in the weeds, and we were 4 deep, and I was cool with it. I was fine. I'm like, boom, there's like people taking pictures and fire, and Chef's sitting there, and he says, as he's leaving, he says to me, he says, Frankie, I know you're like super busy, but this is fucking amazing. And then he left, and I was like, okay. I'm like, whoa, wait a second. I'm like, we got something here. We really got something here. The problem was that the technical level of what I was doing, my creative expression, was getting more involved, So we were reaching a point where I wanted to create these compositions that were reaching a certain level. We're having a hard time meeting up with or keeping up with volume, so what do? And it was actually my business partner, Brent Vanderveen, who had the idea of getting me away from the bar and putting me in back of house. So I ended up going into the kitchen. And it was an absolute game changer for my expression, because what happened at that point was that I had access to a team, literally 4 or 5 people that were there, dedicated cooks, because I actually found at that point that it was easier for me to hire cooks than it was than bartenders, because cooks understood the philosophy of actually executing the program in that environment of a kitchen. So I had to teach them how to bartend, which was kind of a really cool balance, and it actually took my program to the next level. So following the notes of spring, we go into our transformation. And this is the introduction of dry ice into the program, okay? Dry ice, it's somewhat frowned upon, or it was anyway, this is 2011. I didn't care. It's the idea of working with an ingredient that's negative 78.5 degrees Celsius. What does that do? That allows me to freeze alcohol, that allows me to completely freeze cocktails, which is insane. I thought that was absolutely amazing. So this particular expression the inspiration was to start with the flavor profile of a liquid and completely finish with an experience of a completely different cocktail, okay? So you'll see at the top left, you have a frozen cocktail at the base of the glass, which consists of gin, rosemary, Madeira, okay? And then an apricot. And then what happens is the cocktail is frozen from the top down. So the way I do that is I would blitz pulverized dry ice. So I would get dry ice, which comes in pellets, right? Negative 78.5 degrees Celsius. Are we all familiar with what dry ice is? Compressed carbon dioxide gas, yeah? Okay, extremely cold, right? So I'd be able to freeze the cocktail from the top down. The cocktail would then be presented to the guest, okay? And a cocktail of very bright flavor profiles, so like vodka, right? Or neutral grain spirit, if you will. A little bit of effervescence, soda water, okay? Reason being is that soda water activates the palate, activates salivation, and at the same time brings all those essential ingredients, those essential oils and the viscosity of the liquid, brings that all up to the surface. So it actually accentuates aromatics, okay? So vodka, Lillet Blanc, soda water, and orange blossom would be poured on top, okay? The idea was to create a cocktail with a huge juxtaposition in flavor. So as a guest, you're sitting there, you're sipping the cocktail, it's like super bright and floral. Next up, you're sipping, it's getting a little darker. You're like, what is going on? And this was the beginning of the transformative experience in my expression, okay? And to this day, I still put a huge emphasis on that, because from a guest perspective, if you're sitting there enjoying your drink and it's evolving in flavor profile, that's next level. That's insane, because you're building that relationship with it, which I think is super cool. You guys with me so far? I get excited, I talk fast, okay? All right, cool. All right, next up, spring thaw. And now we're starting to get there. Now we're starting to get to my current mindset of as far as where I'm at creatively. So the spring thaw 2014, the introduction of the auditorium of perspective. All right, what does that mean? So basically what that means is that, we've all been to movies where you have like 3-dimensional movies. You put the glasses on, you sit at a theater, right? And the visuals and the sounds, the auditory element, completely engulf you, right? So it just creates this auditorium, if you will. I'm able to achieve that when these cocktails are presented to the guests by different references, visual references, okay? And at the same time, tactile elements, right? So the reason this is presented this way, okay, is because the guest is able to reach into the center of the service piece and have tactile elements of florals, there's greens, there's moss. These are all real, right? I spend roughly $800 Canadian a week on fresh flowers and moss. My business partner hates it. He thinks I'm fucking insane. But it has to be real. It's gotta be real. Because there's a huge aspect of that relationship. If it's fake flowers, the guest knows. There's a huge bullshit detector from the guest perspective. They can tell. They want it real. It's a tactile element. So when the guest reaches in to pick up the glass, they have these beautiful references and tactile feelings on their hands of flowers and moss, etc. And what that does is that allows me to accentuate flavors in the actual composition of the flavors of the cocktail without them necessarily needing to be in the drink. Because the way that our mind works is we have these visual associations with flavor, right? So if you're looking at something and you're seeing a lot of flowers and this beautiful composition of greens, etc., that accentuates particular elements in the actual flavor profile because we do that subconsciously, okay? When the cocktail is presented to the guest, there's then activation of the dry ice element, okay, which is the aromatic component. And that's a blend of cedar oil for depth, okay, lilac for that floral quality, and grapefruit for height, okay, in that composition. And when it's presented, I've literally had guests start to cry because it's so nostalgically powerful that it reminds them of playing in this particular woman reminded her of playing in her grandma's backyard. And for me, artistically, that is the fundamental reason I do what I do, is to create that emotion from a guest perspective that touches them, That's why we're all here at the end of the day, right? All right, so next up, the abstract ice. I love this cocktail because, well, it raises the question. So keep in mind I have a team of 5 chefs in the back of house at BarChef preparing these cocktails, okay? So it raises the question, is this a cocktail or a dish? Is it a cocktail because there's alcohol content, the same alcohol content you would find in a Sazerac, okay? Or is it a dish because it's consumed with a spoon? At what point does what we do from cocktails venture off into the world of dishes? How does that work? What's the reference? Obviously, we've all had desserts and pastries where there's been alcohol incorporated, right? In my opinion, it's a dish. It's just consumed with a spoon, and there's a cocktail and the alcohol element to it. So each individual ice component on this particular cocktail, so you have on the left, there's vessels of violet and black licorice. There's rhubarb, so we would juice fresh rhubarb and create an ice shard, if you will. So we basically just take 700 mils in a baking tray. We pour it out, make sure it's completely level, pulverize dry ice, freeze it, okay, and then break it off in shards, okay? And that's our ice element. At the bottom, if we could go back, yeah, there we go. This element right here, all this stuff, we call that a carbonic snow. As you can tell, I use quite a bit of dry ice, but only because it allows me to manipulate the texture of liquids. So what we do is we take a food processor, we pulverize dry ice, we then very slowly pour a mixture of elderflower liqueur and elderflower soda over the dry ice while it's running, and it creates a carbonic snow, an aerated ice component, if you will. Because what happens as you pour it, the dry ice sublimates, right? So because it's a gas, dry ice goes away, but before it does that, creates a bubble, okay? Bubble with the liquid. And then I have an aerated ice. So all of these different elements interact with the cocktail. So from a guest perspective, if I'm eating this drink and I eat the violet and the black licorice and the rhubarb, if I eat that right away, I'm going to have a different experience with that drink than the person sitting beside me that decides to eat the cucumber and the black licorice brunoise and the elderflower snow first, right? So I think also for me that's a really cool experience from a guest perspective because you're able to completely alter each individual experience. Cool? Is there any questions so far? No, we're good? So if I go to your bars, are you guys going to make me an abstract ice? Right? Okay, cool. I hope so. That's why we're here, right? All right, cool. Okay, so next up, the day into evening. So this is the evolution of that transformative aspect, okay? In the glass, you have an ice sphere that consists of toasted chamomile bitters. There's cacao water and rosemary syrup, proportioned accordingly so that not only can I freeze it, I can press it into an ice sphere, and it melts at a very specific rate, okay? The cocktail itself, tequila based, there's pastis, a little bit of chamomile as well. So the ideology behind this composition is as you're sipping the cocktail, bright, fragrant, summer's day, okay? This was a summer option, so I had this on the list for summer. So you're sipping the cocktail, very bright, very fresh, right? On the far left-hand side of the base, there's an edible gel, okay? This was literally a technique, first time we had done it, where we actually set 2 gels at the same time to create a transformative flavor profile, okay? On the left-hand side, you have flavors of summer's day. So there's freshly cut green grass, there's dill flower, there's chamomile, transitioning into strawberry cream, right? Strawberries and cream, but strawberry gin and cream, set with agar-agar to a fluid gel, fresh basil. Then transitioning, as your cocktail flavor profile is transitioning into darker tones, as is your edible base. So here we have elements of Madeira, starts to get into darker notes like cacao and mint, etc. And lastly, we finish with the air component here, which is hickory, right? So like we've all been outside, summer evening, having a campfire, right? At this point, flavor profile of your liquid is dark. There's lots of notes of cacao, rosemary, etc. And then you're also eating elements of airs that taste of hickory. So that's the idea of the transformative flavor. And once again, real grass. Insane. This was by far my most ambitious service piece to create, because we would literally get these trays of wheatgrass in, and I'd be there like cutting. It had to be a particular length, so my producer was like, dude, this guy's mental with the length of his fucking wheatgrass. Like, we all know wheatgrass grows, you can go to a juice place and get it like pressed, right? But I needed a specific length so that on the service piece it, you know, stood up to the glass in a particular level. It was very, very, very important to me. Just how I roll. Okay. Now we're talking about creative inspiration, right? This next picture is not going to be the best picture. It was nighttime. It was like probably 2 o'clock in the morning. I was taking my dog for a walk. I was at the park. And what do I see? Boom! This beautiful tree. It was absolutely insane. It was like just blossoming, so I had beautiful blossoms of purple, right? With green tones as well from the leaves. There was wood tones from the branches. I took a picture of it because I thought it was absolutely beautiful. It was lit in a particular way. I went home, looked at the picture, started drawing. Following day, I went into work, and I started to create. And the next slide is probably one of my favorite cocktails that we've ever done. My sous chef is insisting we put it back on for winter. It's called the Night Blossom. And so here we get into that abstract expressionist movement again. You can almost see an inspiration of Salvador Dali in the vibe of the photo. It also introduces liquid nitrogen into the program, okay? Before this, I didn't need it. I didn't need it on the program because the particular expression of what I was trying to achieve, the technical aspect of it, I didn't need liquid nitrogen to be able to produce those elements and those components. When I wanted to achieve the noodle base, which is this guy right here, which is also the ice component in this particular composition, I needed liquid nitrogen because I had to try and figure out a way to create a branch, if you will, to be stable enough to the point that from a guest perspective, when the cocktail's poured at the table, okay, it would melt and interact with the actual composition. This particular element is an ice gel, okay, which is much different than just a traditional ice. This will not dissolve. This doesn't dissolve. It's a blend of cacao and chartreuse, okay, with agar and gellan gum. We then make a 6-foot-long noodle, okay? We curl it up in our hands in a very particular way, and we drop it in liquid nitrogen for exactly 12 seconds. If we left it in liquid nitrogen for 13 seconds, it would fall apart as soon as we take it out. If we left it in liquid nitrogen for 10 seconds, it wouldn't be stable enough to plate on it, and by the time it got to the guest table, it would look like shit, and it wouldn't go to the guest, okay? So this here, 2016, we're starting to really evolve, and it's still going on to that point as well of the cocktail or dish element. It's served with chopsticks. It's consumed as you would a ramen, right? But there's a lot of alcohol in there, and it's something I always say to my guests. I'm like, it's very deceiving because they get so excited about the textures and the flavors, and I'm like, it's very deceiving. There's a lot of alcohol in there, so just heads up. And that's our whole thing, BarChef, right? There's always a cocktail element to every single dish that we prepare. Next up, we have our Oceanic. So this is inspired by the Tom Ford perfume Soleil Blanc, okay? So very, very fragrant. And we start to get into the world of association of color. So the ice vessel, this white component, is a bowl that we make out of white chocolate washed water, okay? One of my favorite, I don't know if you guys follow me on Instagram, but it's like one of my favorite things to work with because it is so cool. You literally take white chocolate, okay? It has to be a particular fat content, roughly 17%, and you melt it in water proportionately, okay? Stir it up, melt it, okay? Put it in the fridge overnight. Take it out, you literally have a puck on top of this water of cocoa butter. You take that off, and you have a beautiful white chocolate flavored water with none of that residual cloyness of sweetness from the white chocolate, just essence of white chocolate. It is absolutely amazing. And I'm able to freeze it because there's very low sugar content, right? Because obviously, as we know, sugar content doesn't freeze, right? So it needs to be a very particular amount of sugar. Literally almost none, but just for balance, it has to be in there. So we create a vessel, basically by taking a ladle, filling it with pulverized dry ice, and dipping it back and forth between the mixture of white chocolate water, okay, and the dry ice that's actually in the ladle, okay? So then we have hot water, pour it into the ladle, pop it off, and we get a bowl, right? I then plate in the bowl. From a guest perspective, you're sitting there, the cocktail comes out, and the cocktail is poured table side. Then the guest participatory element, the guest is able to take a spoon, crack apart the bowl. All of these different elements that are found in the bowl fall into the bottom. They stir, and they have a cocktail. Still maintaining that transformative flavor profile because the flavor profile of the white chocolate is there, okay? And it starts to incorporate with the base tones of violet. There's curacao. That's another thing, curacao, blue curacao. Totally frowned upon in the cocktail industry, okay? However, for me, as far as a color in a painting, it works beautifully. This is the essence of the ocean. I don't want to create a dish that tastes like salt water. I'm creating the essence of the ocean, how we perceive the essence of the ocean to taste, if you will. So there's coconut, there's white chocolate, there's elderflower creme fraiche, there's curacao, there's violet, there's almond, there's coriander, there's tarragon, etc. So all different ingredients that pair with that visual reference. Next up, we have the Winter Storm. So this was actually, I'm currently right now on a cross-Canada tour with Glenfiddich Whiskey. They've released this expression called the Experimental Series. This is a dish that I created for them. So we're doing like full coursed plated cocktail tasting menu for 60 people in like 2 weeks, incorporating auditory elements, so sound. So we put you in a room, all closed off. We put you in a room, particular lighting per course, and then auditory elements. When this course is presented, there's thunder and lightning and all these different senses. The idea is multi-sensory approach to the craft, okay? If we could just go back to the slide for a second. Yeah, all right. So this was also the incorporation of the tactile element of texture, okay? So what we have here is a service piece of juniper, fresh juniper, that's literally dipped in a bath of liquid nitrogen. And then when we plate the cocktail and we send it out to the guests, it's pulled out so that when it's presented to the guest, they get this beautiful waft of cold air, which is absolutely amazing. It puts them in that perspective. The guest is then told to begin their experience by consuming these guys right here, which are meringue shards that are flavored of balsam fir absinthe that have been poached in liquid nitrogen. So when they eat those, they get the winter's breath of balsam fir absinthe. And that's how you create cocktails that incorporate that multi-sensory approach, okay? It's the idea of incorporating the guest as an actual component in the composition, okay? Lastly, here we are today. The elderflowers and fougere. Absolutely obsessed with this fucking drink. I love it. There's a particular fern that's used for the composition. It's called a helecho fern. It's found in Peru. And the idea is that the reason I chose this particular fern is A, its stability, because we're making 30 of these a night. We need to make sure that the team is able to plate with it and it's stable for the whole guest experience, which is roughly 30 minutes, 35 minutes. And then also the element of the texture of the leaves. There's a huge aspect of the visual representation of each and every single little point on these leaves. So there's flavors of cucumber, green grass, elderflower, mezcal-based. There's a cryo-poached chantilly of spruce and chartreuse, which is a foam that we put in a little tablespoon measure and placed in liquid nitrogen, which goes right there, with mint and chartreuse fluid gel and fresh mint and basil and dill flowers, etc. As you can hear, a lot of green tones, right? But fougere, the term fougere, is a term used in the perfume industry to define the essence of green, right? So that's the idea here. That's why there's such a huge emphasis on the visual presentation, okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the modern approach to cocktails. So I've been talking a lot, but I think that's why we're all here. Hopefully you enjoyed everything. And if there's any questions, please pull me aside and ask, because I'm here. I hope I can answer them. And guys, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Woo. Actually, check. Da-da. We actually have a couple of minutes left for questions. Does anybody have a question for Frankie Solarik? Ano?
No questions. Woo! All right.
Actually, I have a question.
Okay.
So you really are blurring the lines between, like you said, the bar and the kitchen. Do you
Right.
have chef training?
None.
And none at all.
Zero. Absolutely, no, absolutely zero. It's like I said before, it's just a complete obsession with learning as much as I can. So it's always been about like innovation. Every single new menu we're always incorporating and working with new techniques. So it's the idea of always maintaining relevance and just pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
And just quickly about your R&D approach, how long does the research and development take for each cocktail?
At this
Or
point,
dish.
yeah, at this point, I think I have like a pretty thorough understanding of the way that all of the ingredients interact with temperature and alcohol content, etc. So it happens pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But back in the day, I mean, there's like so the current winter, we're in our fall menu right now, and it's the current menu release is showcasing an item called the what's it called? The birch and eucalyptus. And it's been a concept I've been working on since 2013. Really? So it's like literally 5 years in the making. So, yeah.
That's amazing. Truly inspirational. Thank you so much. Let's have
Cool.
a hand again for Frankie Solarik, please.